Good to be here with you, Chris.
What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think we're here to talk about unlocking the power of device-based hypertension and partnerships. And early the last decade, Medtronic, with its acquisition of Ardian, made a big entry into device-based hypertension. Actually, around the same time, the predecessor company to Orchestra BioMed started development of what we call backbeat cardiac neuromodulation therapy. Now we refer to as atrioventricular interval modulation therapy. 2022, we teamed up to move that through a pivotal trial into commercialization. Hypertension is a huge market, 1.2 billion patients worldwide. 1 in every 2 adults in the United States, 120 million people have hypertension. Number 1 contributor risk factor for death. Every year in the U.S., almost 700,000 people die as a direct or indirect result of hypertension. Talk about Medtronic's view on why this is such a compelling market for device-based innovation, device-based therapies.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having this panel and for LSI for hosting this great event. Look, I mean, if you think about hypertension, right, it is a global healthcare crisis. Half of this auditorium here has hypertension. So just think about the magnitude. Every other person you come to, they probably have hypertension. And so when you think about the big opportunity to make a big impact on healthcare, this is the number one space. Bigger than diabetes, bigger than, other things from a cardiovascular perspective. And so when we looked at it, and actually we got involved into it, in 2009 with an investment, because, it was early in the device world to be looking at hypertension, because it must have previously it was all drug based.
Right.
And so, back then, right, the opportunity was like, wow, we know hypertension is big. We don't know if there's an opportunity for device-based therapies for treating hypertension, but there was a lot of learning along the journey to where we are today. And it still is the number one, factor that everybody's trying to solve for. And we think we have a good solution.
In a conversation I had earlier this morning, a friend referred to hypertension as the trunk of the tree. Hypertension drives heart attack. Hypertension drives stroke. In older patients, which we're really focused on with our therapy, hypertension is that key driver of progression to heart failure, to end-stage kidney disease. You talked about pharmaceutical therapy. At the end of the day, what do you think therapies like AVIM or renal denervation offer in terms of filling the gap that drugs alone really haven't been able to solve for?
Yeah, I mean, if you mentioned the statistics, right? So 120 million U.S., basically half of the adult population, but 75% of that is uncontrolled. So even though they're on meds, they're not controlled and they're not getting to the levels that they need. And so that's the opportunity that device-based therapies can actually have in hypertension, is making an impact to try to get more of the population that has hypertension to a controlled state. Obviously, there's a lot of challenges with pharmaceuticals, right? There's side effects, there's the compliance, right? I don't know about you, but taking 3 to 5 medications every day for the rest of my life isn't something that I, want to look forward to. That's what these patients are dealing with. And I think device-based therapies is an alternative to a lot of this compliance challenge that we see, because, like I said, half of the people that are on meds are not compliant.
Right. Exactly. So I know there's a panel later today on frontiers in renal denervation, a lot of momentum. It's been an exciting last year and a half. FDA approval, add-on reimbursement. I know there's national coverage decision in momentum, but maybe talk about where Medtronic is with the commercialization of the program, what the outlook is, what's in the innovation pipeline with respect to your Ardian program.
Yeah, I mean, so if you think about the journey that we've been on, so we did the acquisition in 2011. HDN3 happened in 2014. we ended up redoing our clinical program from 2014 to, call it a few years ago, and did 5 additional trials, right, to really go after it. We've now treated over 30,000 patients with our device. And, obviously we now have FDA approval. We're in the process of getting the reimbursement. And obviously that was announced at JP Morgan that, by October, we should have NDC notification and reimbursement there. And so from a commercial perspective, we've been doing a lot of work. Obviously, it was approved, and we had sales originally, early on in Europe, and we learned a lot then about the ecosystem that you have to create around this therapy and the clinic that you have to put together. And so we've been doing a lot of work around that aspect over the last few years to really be able to pinpoint what is needed for the clinician to access those patients, treat those patients, and then manage those patients. And so it's been a tremendous effort using social media, using a bunch of different things to really drive kind of that patient population. So it's been a whirlwind, but we're right there, and I expect to see really good things. The other thing that we've done, we started to look at multi-organ denervation. And so we did some small acquisitions around some IP and some assets around that to really bolster our overall kind of offering, because we do think that there's going to be a need for multiple kind of opportunities in device therapy.
We looked at that data. The hepatic denervation looks like you might be able to improve the efficacy, maybe get higher response rates across the population.
So maybe you talk about it.
Yeah, no, and it looks like people are jumping in. So, a lot of people believe that there's going to be finally a real market here. We're excited about the work that you guys are doing. AVIM, I'd love to introduce. So what we're doing together with your cardiac pacing therapies team is now running a pivotal trial for what we call atrioventricular interval modulation therapy. And originally we called it Backbeat CNT. Backbeat trial is our pivotal. So AVIM.
I still refer to it as
there's many in the room that fondly, myself included, refer to it to Backbeat, and so the trial will live on, and we'll see how the branding works down the line. But AVIM is another approach to creating a potent, always-on treatment for hypertension that really, in our view, targets an older, comorbid patient population with increased cardiovascular risk, starting, of course, with a patient population that Medtronic serves and has been serving for decades, the pacemaker population. AVIM is an algorithm, a programming of a standard dual-chamber pacemaker that by running a separate algorithm where you are shortening AV timing, essentially directly reducing the amount of time that the ventricle can fill. You're reducing cardiac preload. You see an immediate drop in blood pressure. But key to the intellectual property is modulating that AV timing, essentially modulating blood pressure with intermittent beats with longer AV intervals. And what this does is prevent an autonomic nervous system response. So we're also working on modulating the autonomic nervous system. That response is increase in sympathetic activity, increase in peripheral resistance. So ultimately, AVIM is able to affect the key targets for pharmaceutical therapy: cardiac preload, cardiac afterload, and sympathetic tone, all at once, simply through pacing, without, and what makes our collaboration so exciting, leveraging the technology that Medtronic helped bring to market and is the dominant market leader, the dual chamber pacemaker. We don't change the hardware. We don't change the implant procedure. We take advantage of the existing leads, and frankly, Medtronic's doing a great job driving conduction system pacing. We saw phenomenal results. As you know, we've run 2 prospective trials, a double-blind randomized trial, high response rates with AVI. Most patients respond, double-digit reductions in ambulatory blood pressure, highly statistically significant, great safety profile to date. And now we're running the Backbeat study, which is a 500-patient global double-blind randomized study, which we think is going to allow Medtronic to commercialize broadly. So it's an exciting therapy, but also an exciting collaboration.
Well, and the interesting thing is, I think, from my perspective, there's 2 aspects to it. One, it's a patient population that we already have in our domain. but we're adding additional kind of capability to address another need that patient population has to really penetrate a broader patient population of the hypertension world, right? That's the first thing. The second thing is that what I really like about it is that it's always on. That's the same kind of our thesis, right, for renal denervation. It's always there. We've denervated, it's always there. Medication, wears off over time. When you're asleep, it goes off, it goes away, right? And so with the AVIM as well as the renal denervation, it's a treatment algorithm that is actually always there and on and treating the patient and maintaining control.
Yeah, I think that's a key point of where device-based hypertension offers value, and also really good insight into how Medtronic is approaching through a portfolio approach, having multiple options, having ideally a care pathway and a continuum of care. And it's been exciting to work, with the pacing team, but also the RDN team to think about how that synergy can be, one, what could we learn in terms of clinical trial execution? Because these trials are difficult, and we're innovating not just in the technology, but how you introduce that technology into that collaborative care approach, but also thinking about how you're going to serve patients at different stages. Patients in their 50s that now are being put on meds for their hypertension versus patients in their 70s where you really have worrying about significant risk of hypertension driving heart failure. Interesting to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, the easy answer of that, right, is hypertension at the end of the day is a lifestyle disease, right? And so you have to meet the patient where they're at,
right,
and what the needs that they have. And every patient is different in how they interact and how they respond and how they want to be medicated or treated. And so having that broad spectrum kind of offering of various different opportunities of therapy is what is going to really go after and hopefully tackle this global crisis that we have here. And so you need to wrap around the patient and the physician and the clinic to make sure that you're being able to be flexible to address all of those individual needs. It's very much like diabetes, right? And you think about that ecosystem and the various different aspects that need to play. It's critically important.
We're learning that as we execute on the clinical trial of having to build collaboration between the EPs that typically are the implanters or pacemakers and their colleagues, both clinical cardiologists, hypertension specialists, and we've gained great insight through the RDN team about how they had to do the same thing in executing the trials and ultimately now bringing the therapy to market.
Yeah, I mean, you bring up the referral channel, right? I mean, that is something that I would say we underestimated pre-HTN3 when we were commercializing it. The referral pathway was a very important gatekeeper to getting those patients treated. And so we've spent a lot of time since HTN3. Luckily, we've had the opportunity, luckily or unluckily, however you want to think about it, to really kind of digest those burdens and barriers that were there to now, as we look to go forward, to really kind of commercialize and capitalize on that. I mean, the interesting thing is if you think about how this is played out. So before HTN3, I was on the BD side for renal denervation, and we were tracking close to 70 different companies, startups. HTN3 happened. There were 3. Everybody else startup went away, right? And now there's still 3, right? If you think about it, at the end of the day, for current, excluding obviously the pacemaker based. But if you think about it from that perspective, also the patient population was restricted hypertension. Now it's uncontrolled. So it's a bigger pie with less competitors. But the important piece of it that I think is we need to have more competitors, because in order to get to that billion patient population and really have a difference, we need to have everybody thinking about what are the different aspects that we can contribute to the overall ecosystem of treating hypertension.
So some of your competitors making acquisitions recently is something you welcome.
Well, I mean, they're far behind us, so I'm happy about that as well, because we'll be out in the front. But yeah, I think having somebody help and look at it from different perspectives, and if you think about it again from the global crisis, more people coming in and having different solutions, I think, is critical.
The backdrop you talk about, the 70 companies pursuing Ardian, was the same time where we started initiating work on backbeat CNT, and it was an interesting environment. Part of why we found that concept and IP was, hey, we're not going to jump into the mix in that kind of field as innovators. And we spent, a lot of what we've collaborated on is built around, we like to think of it as a mountain. There's about 120 patents that protect AVIM therapy that now we're working with exclusively. We spent 3 years not talking to anyone as we were working on development of the algorithm and the first clinical data. And so and it's interesting now to be at this point where we're actively collaborating with Medtronic, who it's a foundational business. You dominate in terms of that 1 in every 2 pacemakers roughly is a Medtronic pacemaker around the world. And being able to think about how to actively leverage that knowledge base, that market share, that expertise in what we're doing is certainly very powerful. And thinking about how that pairs with, and there's really a renaissance going on in cardiac pacing, that you guys are driving leadless conduction system pacing, and now obviously working together on new therapies that pairs with ultimately bringing this whole continuum of care and device-based hypertension. It's pretty fun to be working together on this.
Oh, it's very fun. And I think that's why the relationship is working, right? Is you guys at a time where everybody was getting out, came at it from a different direction, and an innovative direction to say, okay, maybe there's a different way of thinking about this and a different patient population that we can focus on, that could be additive to the opportunity. And so to me, that's why we have a very similar mindset of what we're trying to achieve. But I would love to hear how you feel, partnering with Big Blue, right? And there's pros and cons, right? So I'd love to hear that.
Well, we're about 2.5 years into the partnership, and I would say we feel great, but it's been a learning exercise. One of the challenges for a small company is having to be able to match up and create the right effective relationships throughout the counterparty organization. So we work mainly with the Cardiac Pacing Therapies group. But for example, one of the things that's happened over the last year is a lot of collaboration's been opened up with the Ardian team as well, and sharing insights there. So collaborations in this partnership to me is strong, not just because everything's going well. A lot of things have gone well. I think we planned a robust study. We really see the study as a standard of care study. How do you essentially provide clinical evidence, not just for approval, but to take advantage of Medtronic's enormous market leadership worldwide? But we've also learned what I think I'm most proud of, and I think what your teams would say is we've learned how to solve problems and encounter obstacles and get through those obstacles together. And because of that, there's this gelling that gives us confidence that we now are much faster to identify problems, much faster to find solutions. We're thinking long-term, not just about executing the trial, but how do we establish through the work we're doing that care pathway to make sure the therapy can be used in the existing infrastructure. And thinking about alignment. A big part of Orchestra's model is built on risk-reward sharing partnerships. So we're learning with your team. Clearly, there's things that we couldn't do without the partnership with Medtronic, and it's powerful and enabling. The exciting part is your team's also seeing that there's things that they normally couldn't do without a sponsor like Orchestra that's actually taking the lead. It's effectively our study. We're the sponsor. We're taking that charge, and so it's been a learning exercise, but a really exciting one, which really is proving a thesis we have, that risk-reward sharing partnerships can be a powerful way of driving innovation. Sometimes it's lonely to be an innovator and not have those resources, so we have the benefit of both. What has the feedback gotten from your team?
And I know that we debated the title, right, of unlocking the opportunity, but I also was, it's a new frontier because
Yeah.
it is for us, right? We've learned a lot over the last, whatever, almost 20 years in this space, and we're still learning, right? And so, but then we partner with folks like yourselves that actually have the ability to be very disciplined, very focused, in a subject matter expertise that actually can complement and move things along much faster than probably what we could do internally. And so, as well as challenge our thinking, right? Because as you get longer into a space, you get biases, right? And so it's good to have kind of partners that are looking at it from different perspectives, and really kind of thinking about how do we push the envelope of that new frontier and actually get into something different.
So it's certainly something that Orchestra does in our day-to-day collaboration with Medtronic is it challenge some ingrained thinking, come from a perspective of different ideas. Well, maybe that's the way traditionally studies were done in pacing, but how do we think about applying different approaches to this study? How do we think about designing the study differently? But clearly, from our perspective, being able to be part of thinking about where are we going to be with AVIM therapy in 3, 5, 10 years? How does it, fit in this continuum of care alongside Medtronic is really powerful as an innovator.
Well, and I also think that, right, we bring value because we have a different relationship with the agency, right?
Absolutely.
We can help you guys get things kind of off the table that may or never going to fly with the agency through a very, normal interaction that we would have, whereas you would have to have a very formal interaction, right? And so there is the benefits on both sides that I've seen so far.
Yeah. You guys should be aware that when you are the market leader in pacemakers, the FDA wants to have a standing monthly call with your regulatory team just to check in on topics. When you're the partner developing a new therapy, that's very powerful. And it's very helpful to be able to have extra access and take advantage of that. And we've used that effectively on multiple fronts to advance this program.
Yeah.
So there's strength on both sides. I think what now as we're in the trial, I think the excitement around this therapy, and we were talking about this earlier, the patient population is distinct. The patient population we're currently serving is indicated for a pacemaker, but who are those patients? You're talking about patients that are on average 72 years old. They generally have high rates of comorbidity. The number one comorbidity is hypertension. Upwards of 70% of patients worldwide that get a pacemaker also have hypertension, but it's not run-of-the-mill hypertension. High rates of isolated systolic hypertension. Last month, as you know, we put out data from our prior trial. The other thing you see in these patients is diastolic dysfunction, vessel stiffening. The heart essentially loses its ability to relax. And what we're seeing with our therapy that I think is a great promise in terms of what its clinical impact and potential is actually remodeling that effect on the heart, not just lowering blood pressure in patients where it's really difficult to do so, but remodeling that. And it's been exciting to work alongside the team to say, okay, where do we go with this for the patient population we're serving, but also beyond? And it's been phenomenal to have that type of thought process going back and forth.
Well, and that's the power of partnership, right? I mean, if Lisa was up here yesterday talking about she had never thought that she would ever partner with Medtronic coming from Abbott or being at Abbott, right, on diabetes. That's how you tackle these types of huge, complex challenges that are going to make a difference in society. And I think that's what we're trying to all do. This is obviously a big undertaking, and it's going to take a lot of effort and a long journey. But that's what we're up for, right? And I think that's what you guys are up for as well.
No, 100%. So let's talk about what we think the future holds. I think we all like to fast forward. We're here, to talk about the future of medical technology. So maybe 5 years. We certainly expect to be through our pivotal trial. We're very confident in the results. You talked about some of the key developments that are happening in real time to open up the global commercial opportunity for Ardian. Where do you see Medtronic now having a powerful portfolio and and how big a part of your future growth do you see these type of opportunities being?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, hypertension is a big part of our growth story. Not only our market leading position, our head start, but like I said, the size of the opportunity, and we think that it could have a material impact on Medtronic's growth. But we're not standing still, because in TCT in 2024, we announced that we are doing a multi-organ denervation trial. And so we're looking at how do we continue to advance and grow this, first starting obviously on the hypertension side. But if I go back to the years, before HDN3, we had a lot of different ideas of where to take renal denervation or denervation. And heart failure, obviously is a critical, big need and unmet need of that. And so there's lots of opportunities beyond just the hypertension project. But, we're right now solely focused on the hypertension and wanting to make a dent into that.
So with an RD in launch, with trials going on and expanding the capability, with the Backbeat study and AVIM, do you feel very confident Medtronic is going to set the pace, total pun intended, for what will be a real, in this decade and beyond, device-based hypertension therapeutic market?
Yeah, absolutely. I would love to sit up here in 5 years and say we've made a big dent into that billion patients.
It would be fun to be part of that.
I would actually love to see the number of patients that we've treated at that point in 5 years, because I think it's going to be massive. Like I said, we've already treated over 30,000. I think it's going to be, well over, 300, maybe 400, 500,000 patients by then, and maybe even more beyond that.
Yeah, I envision that as well. And the other part is to be able to complement that organic market development growth with what we're doing together, which is taking a foundational business and opening up what we see as a multi-billion-dollar additional growth market. It's nice to be.
I mean, what are you hearing from your investor group, and you're out in the road a lot talking about this?
We are. I mean, I think the data speaks for itself. I think the collaboration is novel. I think clearly, as we talk to investors, as we talk to the clinical community, there's a huge boost to the credibility of our program by we're literally running our therapy on your devices. We're in the clinic together. And I think what is taking shape is a shared vision that not only can this capability impact the patients they're treating every day, but it, along with the other innovations that are coming, pacemakers becoming something you can implant in the heart, not just single chamber, but dual chamber, pacemakers being able to deliver therapy that is physiologic and reduces the risks. And now pacemakers offering ways to control blood pressure, but also ultimately prevent events and progression. It's exciting to work with the physician community now sees, wait a minute, something that sort of a sleepy business, an important one, is becoming a innovation business. From an investor standpoint, it's out of the box. Just the idea that Orchestra is executing on data generation and clinical evidence generation, but will benefit over the long term through what, uniquely Medtronic is able to accomplish, particularly in this field where your market share has pretty much been number one from day one and hasn't really changed. So a lot of excitement, but still questions. People worry about, do we control our own destiny and so on. So it's been fun. It's fun to talk about this. And I would say as we progress, it's exciting to have these opportunities to bring something novel. And hopefully it inspires other collaboration through the industry. Our big conviction is it's hard to be an innovator when you have to take on everything by yourself, including commercialization. It is powerful to be able to do this together and problem solve together and envision where we can be 5-10 years in the future in an aligned fashion. So it's exciting. A lot more work to do, but I think we're pretty confident in how that work's going to go.
So let's make sure 5 years from now we're back on this stage and Scott puts us there and we talk about it.
You got that? All right. We'll make an appointment. All right. Thanks so much, Chris.
Appreciate it.